Welcome back to another episode of the 706. But we got to do things a little differently here because, as Kirk informed all of us just a few days ago, it is the 5th anniversary of meeting everyone here for the first time. You know, I'm Anthony, and I'm going to go around and let's do the quick introductions of everyone.
I'm Tony. Could we roll that highlight reel of all the memories from those 5 years? All right, guys, roll the clip. That was great. All right, I'm Tony.
I'm Connor.
And I'm Kirk. Anthony misspoke. So for the audience, I met these three fine individuals 5 years ago. They're all childhood friends. They all grew up in the same orphanage in Detroit. And so there's a long lineage there. But yeah, so I'm the newbie here. And you might be able to tell that based on how this podcast is about to go. I'll just say that much. A little foreshadowing.
Yes,
Wow.
It's true. I'm sorry. I forgot my grammar. My grammar was off. You know, A Little Princess was based on my life, though. So
You saved Anthony from like a pack of wild dogs.
Exactly. So
I took him under my wing.
And, there was a really haunting moment a few years ago when Anthony was really struggling with his alcoholism and depression. He looked at me and he said, "Why did you save me from those wild dogs? Why?"
I'd be better dead.
Yeah, you should have left me.
Exactly. All right. So we're here today to talk about, finally, a David Lynch movie. And I say we start with Kirk because, one, I'm going to say this actually earnestly, though, is I think Kirk, and we may all disagree, but I think Kirk is the most or the hardest person to pin down in terms of his kind of taste.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be kind of a joke of what we thought you might like, unless Leonardo DiCaprio's in it. Then that's a go-to. But he's very willing to sort of go on an instinct and then to kind of question it. And at times it really works for him in the case of like The Hunt, where just it sells you so much. But at other times it just leads you to really question what we're watching and, why did the person make what they did? So I'm actually kind of really curious about your opinion on this.
See, I don't know, man. Maybe I shouldn't go first because I want to kind of rebut all the eloquent points that are to come from Connor and Tony.
That's true. He can cut us down for
cinephile
piety.
I have a feeling Tony's going to try to, cross-examine me, and I don't want to feel so exposed.
Okay.
So why don't we let them, placate your cinephile influences?
Sure. So Kirk is rating the This Is a High School Dorm movie, as we speak. But so Tony here,
Sure.
I actually owe a debt because Tony was the first person who actually introduced me to David Lynch when we saw Mulholland Drive at the IFC at midnight.
Wow.
It was that sophomore year of college. I had, of course, known his name, but that was the first time I'd seen it. Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
We'll go with
I didn't
Tony.
know that. Yeah, this is he's a special guy. I mean, he's one of the, one of the greats is like a cliche or like an easy thing to say about him, but he's really there's no one like David Lynch. There's a reason Lynchian is a cliche. It's like when you want to say something's weird or surreal, you say it's Lynchian, right? It's almost like kind of hack at this point. There's usually a better point of comparison than Lynch because Lynch is something very specific. It's not like, oh, it's just weird or, oh, it's like a dream, even though those things are true, right? I mean, he's probably our most famous, surrealist in film, most mainstream success, closest thing to a household name in that tradition. I'm rambling, of course. I do like Lynch. I haven't seen all his movies, but the ones that I love. He's made some of my absolute favorites. And this is one that is one of his more famous movies. This is probably his the best gateway Lynch movie because it's sort of it's not a total outlier like something like Dune, but it's not totally abstract and totally out there like a Mulholland Drive. It kind of strikes the good balance between Twin Peaks. There's actually a lot of similarity to Twin Peaks, and then something like Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive or something a little more surreal. It's a good kind of bridge between those two worlds where you get a little taste of everything he kind of has to offer, whether it be the imagery, the comedy, the music, it kind of it's like a little sampler for kind of what he's all about, as well as sort of, I think, almost like a Rosetta Stone. It kind of lets us into his head a little bit as to what his main thematic concerns are and sort of what he finds interesting. But yeah, no, I'd seen this movie once before and I didn't remember it as well. It didn't stick in my mind the way like Mulholland Drive did or Fire Walk with Me did, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. But watching it again, I think I appreciated it more. I mean, this is a very tasty, very chewy movie. It's got a lot of just really great images and moments and scenes, you know, a lot of like just iconic moments like the ear in the field and the shot of Kyle MacLachlan looking through that closet with the light on his eyes, you know, magnificent use of light and shadow and sort of these like Technicolor 1950s aesthetic juxtaposed with the really grimy, dingy, and dirty. To me, this movie is about how hard it is to be a nice boy in the world today. Kyle MacLachlan, he just wants to be a nice boy, and it's so hard. He just can't. He can't do it. But, you know, I mean, this is just a movie about, you know, light and dark, not good and evil exactly, but light and dark. And sort of the most simple explanation is like there's the darkness under the surface of this suburban idealized world, right? I mean, that's the obvious, but I think there's something, I think if that's all there was to it, this isn't a movie that we would still be talking about or still watching. I think there's something very timeless about this, you know, even if these images of idealized suburbia are very dated now and are kind of like out of step with modern depictions of like family life or the suburbs we see in TV and movies. There's something very timeless about the idea of like, there's a surface level of life and then there's something primal, something deep, something that's maybe a little bit sick and disgusting, but there's something important about it, right? I mean, it's not a matter. I think Kyle MacLachlan basically has to confront and embrace his dark side. You know, it's similar to kind of what I said about Collateral, but I think it's kind of dealing with some of the same stuff. He has to confront and accept his dark side. And I think... Okay.
Sorry, I just threw up in my mouth. I'm sorry. Go ahead, continue.
Okay, well, anyway.
Well,
I thought you didn't want me to cross-examine you, but now I have to. And then
bring it on.
One last point. And I mean, there's no shortage of things to just pick up on this movie, but like one other thing too is the line that I really liked toward the end, which I think recontextualizes some things, is Laura Dern said, "I just couldn't watch that." You know, right after she's met Isabella Rossellini's character and has basically found out that like Kyle MacLachlan's been cheating on her, right? And she immediately forgives and forgets and says, "I just couldn't watch that." And the idea of watching an observation and watching making you part of something, watching making you be complicit, and whether to watch something or not to watch something, and whether not watching something is a way of avoiding it, of a way of avoiding culpability, or whether we all have that darkness in us, whether or not we choose to see it. This movie has a lot to offer, I think. I think it's a very rich text.
all right, interesting. All right, so Connor, I picked this movie because last week we did Double Indemnity, Billy Wilder, one of David Lynch's favorites. And so I think Connor's going to tell us how it compares to the works of the great Latin and Greek artist, but we'll see. So
I don't know
Connor.
exactly I would compare it to Lynch. I guess he's kind of a sui generis, I might say, not to say it in Latin. But yeah, I mean, I would second a lot of what Tony said. I mean, that's definitely, I think, what's kind of going on. I mean, just to give my kind of personal take, I had forgotten when I picked it. I described all of our batch of movies for last episode as kind of dorm room classics. I had forgotten that, in fact, I did watch Blue Velvet for the first time in a dorm room. And in fact, I think it was with you, Tony. I think it was when I was in college. And, it really like knocked me on my ass the first time I watched it. I think I had seen Eraserhead before, but Blue Velvet, right, it just so lures you in with its very sensuous, filmic qualities, and then hits you like a ton of bricks with kind of the horror and the sort of, again, even the eroticism of it, right? It really struck a chord with me as someone who was, I don't know, kind of an adolescent, right? Like Kyle MacLachlan's character, I thought I felt a real kind of connection to it. I was very enchanted by it, mesmerized even. In the years since then, right, I've always held it like, it's always held a fond place in my heart. But between then and now, I've watched so many like Blue Velvet explained YouTube videos or the Schmoop and Spark Notes, of the world, whatever kinds of things. I have to say, like, I didn't like it that much when I watched it. Now, that could also be up to, just immediate circumstances, my particular mood or whatever, but something was missing. It didn't have quite that punch, maybe because I've changed, right? But I'm almost envious, and I want to hear Kirk's opinions, even if they're negative or positive, because I'm almost envious of Kirk for being able to watch this for the first time.
All right, Kirk,
All
it's
right,
time.
folks. Put the timestamp here for the David Lynch apologists. Put the timestamp. First off, I'd like to apologize to my colleague Tony. It was very out of form to interrupt him so violently and barbarically. He was making eloquent points. I do admit,
Kind of Dennis Hopper-esque almost.
yes,
Frank-esque.
I'm over here. I'm huffing some nitrous oxide. I just popped an oxy, and I am ready to go, Daddy. All right. So let me begin by asking this, querying you guys. How old do you think Laura Dern was when this movie came out?
In her late 20s?
She was 19 years old. How old do you
Really?
think Kyle MacLachlan was when this movie came out?
Early 20s.
He was 27.
Ah.
But I'm supposed to buy into Kyle MacLachlan as this, supposedly 19-year-old. He's like a year ahead of her, maybe two. First and foremost, there's a casting issue here. Kyle MacLachlan is too mature, both physically and socio-emotionally, linguistically, to be believed to be this vulnerable character in this position. I needed someone else. I don't know who I'd have to, go back and see who would be available at that time, but I needed someone more raw. And Kyle MacLachlan is a little too polished, even though this is pre-Twin Peaks. But anyways, minor gripe, right? Though it did stick with me throughout the movie. If I were to use one word to characterize this film, not to disparage any of your opinions, but I would use the word sophomoric. I think it was a sophomoric attempt by kind of a director slash screenwriter who's finding his way in the industry. He'd already been established to an extent, but his greatest works, if you were to come. This movie is made for young men in the way that, Stand By Me is made for young men, right? This is a movie for men trying to grapple with their sexuality, their dark impulses, their tendency toward, autoerotic asphyxiation and understanding what that means. No, this movie is problematic, and not to sound too 2020 right now, but I just couldn't get over the fact that Lynch couldn't be bothered to make any of the women in this film actual characters. They are merely fuck dolls or passive NPCs who ask questions to further the plot. There is no character development outside of one speech with Laura Dern where she pontificates about robins and the goodness in the world, and it's like the most basic bullshit you'd ever hear in your life. And so that is a big turnoff for me. And I understand this movie's supposed to be subversive, right? It's supposed to subvert our expectations and our conceptions of post-war nuclear idyllic suburbia, right? And we're supposed to see all that's teeming underneath the madness, the entropy, the violence. And I think Dennis Hopper did a great job. I think he was the perfect fit for the role, but his chaotic Mad Men-esque just insanity really kind of bounced, like a golf ball would on grass. It didn't bounce too much in deep grass. Like there was no bounce there. There's nothing for him to bounce off of, because to me, Kyle MacLachlan's like virginal, naive perspective is undermined by the fact that he's so already he's like a pre-rapist in a sense. He's already into home invasions, but we're supposed to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's this innocent young child looking for truth. Like, let's look at his actions and how outwardly predatory they are. In a way, he's involving himself in other people's lives when he has no right to, just because he found an ear. So he found some evidence of wrongdoing. He handed it to the police, as he should have. If the movie ended and Kyle MacLachlan woke up and it was all a fever dream, my opinion of this movie would immediately skyrocket, because it's so I just want to scream at it and be like, what the fuck are you doing? And I know that's not a very eloquent thing to say, and I am rambling here. and we can get into it more. But I think the idea that I'm trying to convey is that if you're going to be subversive and if you're going for shock, then have Laura Dern masturbate to her image of Kyle MacLachlan as he's fucking Isabella Rossellini. You know, do that. Have
Go
Dennis
on, Kirk.
have Dennis Hopper fist fuck, you know, Isabella Rossellini while Kyle MacLachlan masturbates in the closet. Have Kyle MacLachlan, you know, shave Dorothy's pubes while she cries and says to hit her. Like, you know, one more thing. The idea here is that man's exploration of his own demons triumphs over women's rights not to be exploited or victimized, right? Like, we're supposed to empathize more with the fact that, oh my gosh, he hit her. Oh, what is he doing? Is he turning bad over the fact that he actually hit her? That's horrible. That's horrible. And there's like, well, she was asking for it throughout this whole thing, and it's almost like a rapist depiction of who a woman is. Like, this woman is totally like, she'll just fuck anything, and she thinks everyone is her ex-husband or her missing husband, and she wants to be beaten up because that's what she likes. You like it like that, don't you, you little filthy bitch? And to me, that's, you know what, that's Bush League, man. Like, David Lynch, step up. And I know at the end he can just say, well, that's exactly, I'm subverting your expectations. I'm making you feel this way. Well, you know, if that's the case, then fuck you twice, David Lynch. Anyways, go ahead.
Sure. Well, that was some strong, bitter words from Kirk.
I told you to take the
interesting. Yeah, nicely said. Interesting camera angle for
maybe
that.
Maybe not nicely said, but
yes,
it was nice.
Very well put. Now, I think I'll start real quick by just saying I think I'm somewhere in between on this rewatch, which is the first time I've seen it in about 3 years, between Tony and Connor, in that, in a sense, I definitely think there's more interesting and better work from him. And I'm definitely more inclined to think about those ones over time, or I have been. And then at this time, I think the movie is about 2 hours, and it really hits me, though, still, for about an hour and 45 minutes of it. I think the end itself is where I kind of wish it could have been picked up a little bit differently. But I'm fully with it from here on out, and I don't know if it's because I'm inclined not to want to take it on a super superficial value, which definitely is, you know, as Kirk pointed out, sort of problematic and tricky. And on the other hand, it is definitely a sort of, at least through internet circles and anecdotally speaking, a sort of young male type of movie along the lines of, you know, Fight Club or some of the Christopher Nolan people as we know it, or Stanley Kubrick is probably a better name to throw out there. And of course, you know, anecdotally speaking, there's definitely a lot of females I know who really appreciate the movie. But I think it does beg into question is, how do we take those sort of morally gray or morally negative items, and do they only work because we have to kind of interpret them out? Because to me, I see so much character in Laura Dern's Sandra and Dorothy, but I definitely will admit that I have to do a lot of work to bring it out. I don't think that would fully satisfy someone like Kirk, which I think are valid criticisms. And I know like someone like Roger Ebert, right?
Yeah,
like
Roger Ebert hated this movie. He thought it was misogynistic, yeah.
Yeah, shared a lot of your sort of moral complaints. And, you know, so there's definitely that. I will say about Kyle MacLachlan, it totally works for me when I think about it at the time. And one is like, for me, Kyle MacLachlan is a very innocent looking actor.
Yeah.
To me, I also think about him in relation to someone else who was huge at the time, of like Tom Cruise and sort of Risky Business. And there's various moments throughout Blue Velvet where I just thought he looked so much like Tom Cruise did in that movie, who's also playing a sort of young person and looks way older than he, you know, that sort of age should be. So in a way that kind of doesn't bother me, but I mean, I fully give you credit for it. So.
Thank you. I just one thing before, I just want to say there's obviously a bit of snark and frivolity ingested and is implied in my response. This isn't a bad movie. It made me feel interesting. You know, it made me feel weird at times and uncomfortable, and I appreciate that. And even like there's some arousing scenes, and it makes you kind of empathize for Kyle MacLachlan in those situations. But at the same time, why the fuck is he in those situations? And is it just like the surreal, like, how do you guys get over the fact that he shouldn't even be in this situation to begin with? Who in their right minds, like Laura Dern says, this is crazy. This is dangerous. This is so dumb. And so I don't know. Anyways, go ahead.
I want to, real quick, you said earlier that if the movie had ended with him waking up from a fever dream, you would have liked it a lot more. I mean, to me, with any David Lynch movie, I kind of assume it's a dream right off the bat. I kind of abandon the literal interpretation and say, this is all psychological. This is all symbolic, right? So I think this, to me, is basically an internal, subjective movie, right? And maybe that's an easy way to dismiss these criticisms, but I think it goes a long way toward answering some of those things. And obviously, yes, there's transgressive and like problematic content in the movie, but I think so much about the movie, like to me, I forget who said it once, but I think that there's something very courageous and something very honest about putting your worst inclinations and your worst aspects into a work of art, like showing off the ugly side of you, because 99% of art is you presenting your noblest principles, your noblest ideas, and just sort of almost like this idealized version of yourself. Like, this is what I believe. This is who I am. It's like the super ego. And this is a movie that says, no, who am I David Lynch really? What sick thoughts do I have? What perversions do I have? And I have a lot of respect for an artist who can channel those things and be honest with them and risk being called these things, who will risk being criticized for them. Because I think what he would say is like, I'm not the only one who feels these things or sees these things. I mean, he makes us complicit every step of the way. I think that's the point. You think we're supposed to be like, yeah, why are you going in there? We're supposed to think that. But at the same time, we want him to go in there, Kirk. Don't we want him to? Like, to progress the plot? Aren't we excited by what's in there? Aren't we right there with him when he's looking through that crack? I mean, it makes you complicit every step of the way and forces you to face these ugly things about yourself. Maybe I didn't do that for you, but I feel sort of provoked by that. I feel sort of like, and as far as her like wanting to be hit and stuff, again, it's like, you know, subverting your expectations or whatever, but it's like what we would expect and what we would want is like for her to say, no, don't do that or whatever. And it's like her refusing to be put in that box. It's like Taxi Driver, right? He wants to save Jodie Foster, and we want him to save Jodie Foster because she's in a horrible situation. But like, he doesn't want to save her for like altruistic reasons. He's got his own messed up, weird, probably sexual reasons for that himself. You know what I mean? And it kind of puts us into that place where we are questioning that motive. So I think this is right in that tradition. And I think it very successfully kind of draws out these themes and kind of makes us think in these kind of counterintuitive ways. And I really respect that about the movie.
Yeah. Well, the moment that's probably most clear is when, before it all kind of kicks off into motion of him going in, like right before the bug scene, Laura Dern tells him, I don't know if you're a detective or a pervert. And it's kind of the key like line of the film, because on one hand isn't all sort of sense of the scopophilia, the act of like, you know, it's a sort of meta line about the film noir genre, the movie going genre itself, of, you know, the viewing itself as a sort of perversion, which of course, when he's behind that little curio, it's been analyzed to death as like a sort of analog for, you know, watching a movie, but it is very similar. And we are in the sort of line of, you know, being in the sort of scope of the pervert in all sort of senses of the term with Kyle MacLachlan himself. We're implicated, like Tony was saying. But I think on the other line too, as Tony was saying, with like the idea of how we view it and how do we take the matter of the sort of dream logic of the film, is how do we read sort of then the beginning and the ending scenes itself, which is, for me, the whole movie works because it's so in the view or in the dream world of Sandra herself, that she herself is constantly saying at moments of time that, I don't know why I put you through this. And it becomes, for me, the key to understanding her own family dynamic projected onto these other characters, which is why we always see it so differently and always through a view that doesn't seem quite there. I don't know if that makes sense. But
so Sandra is kind of like a point of view character.
She
and
is
this
sort
is
of, yeah.
I'm curious to elaborate. I've never heard this. See, in all of my YouTube video watching,
Yeah.
I'm sad to say this is a cool take. I don't know. Elaborate, Anthony.
My kind of thing about this is, one hand is she's the person who's always kicking into things in emotion, even if it seems like Jeffrey is the one doing it. And we get the clues in her moments where she says, I don't know why I'm making you do this. But on the other hand, she's also offering the line of, I can't go along with this. And so there's a dual tension there that's very much like the dream, right? Which is that our worst ideas are kind of brought out, our repressions are brought out. And we have hints early on that her family dynamic isn't quite fully healthy, which is, I think, why we see the family dynamic of Dorothy and Frank Booth as sort of parental figures at their worst, completely sort of sadistic, completely violent. And for the sort of family dynamic like that, if we take the sort of Freudian moment to its worst, that the sexuality and the sex itself is horrific. It's not healthy at all. And it becomes a sort of violent moment between anyone who engages with the mother figure. Not to go overly academic, but that was like how I always kind of think about the movie.
I agree with that last part, but the first part, that's a little generous to say that Laura Dern urges him on. I mean, she informs him in the beginning. He completely independently comes up with a plan. He meets her at school. There's no inclination that she's going to seek him out again. She tells him that she has a boyfriend, all these things.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know if I buy that reading 100%, but I think there's something to it. I mean, I think that in a dream, right, if this is her dream, we would take our worst impulses and give them to someone else. So maybe she has this within herself. So she creates Kyle MacLachlan, who's not her boyfriend. She has a boyfriend. He's this other guy. He's this other man who comes in town, and he can do all the voyeuristic and perverted things that she wants to do, but she can't accept it in the dream because she can't take that responsibility. So she assigns it to him. And it's like that scene later. She's like, don't tell my dad that I'm involved. Don't tell my dad. Don't let my parents see this side of me that no one can see. So I think I don't know if that's the correct reading, but I think it gives you enough to kind of tease that out. I think that's one angle through which you can view a lot of these things. And I mean, Kyle MacLachlan watching Frank Booth and Dorothy is very much, it feels like a kid. It feels like a kid watching his parents, like that image of the kid hiding in the closet while the parents fight, not understanding what he's seeing. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a lot to that. I think there's a lot you can tease out there.
And isn't there something kind of classic about how every time she kind of urges him no, that he does it anyway? That it's the very sort of like her saying like, you shouldn't do it, that gets him to kind of do it. It's almost like, like I have a boyfriend. So all of a sudden he could go after her.
Do you see what I mean though about like, that's kind of like, oh man, I don't like, that's a very like egocentric from the perspective of Kyle, like where everybody's actions are determinate of his behavior, right? And like he bears no responsibility for the fact that he's actually the one who's taking these steps, right? Like, or are we still just trying to look at it from the perspective of it being in Sandra's dream?
Well, I'm saying that's just one angle through which you can view the movie. I think it works either way. I mean, I think you can say if it's her dream, it's her offloading these dark, to quote Marianne Williamson, the dark psychic forces. She's putting them on someone else so she doesn't have to claim them because she's always so innocent. She's so pure. She represents the 1950s idealized like high school blonde, aw shucks, sweetie pie. But Kyle MacLachlan, as you pointed out, does do these things, So if it's his dream, he is taking responsibility for them. So I think it depends on how you look at it, but I don't think one is like inherently wrong or like self-contradictory or anything.
I don't know. What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, I mean, I really can't refute Kirk's point. It's a psychic study rooted in kind of in adolescent male, maybe not experience, but, sort of feelings or what have you, right? Identity, whatever you want to call it. And I think the fact that we have these two kind of polar characters who are literal kind of virgin whore, archetypes, right? And kind of girlfriend, mother kind of ideas, right? I think it's just like, it's hard to imagine Sandra kind of being in the central position.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think there's something to what Anthony is saying because, there's a kind of a bookending effect of at first Sandra saying kind of in the first part of the movie, saying to Kyle MacLachlan that this idea that he has, it's a fun daydream, but we shouldn't do it for real. And then by the end, she says, this is a bad dream. So I think there's just something kind of pointed about that. I don't like, of course, though, it's literally a dream, kind of thing, but clearly that's obviously some kind of clue or some kind of statement or some kind of possible avenue of interpretation.
Interesting. And I think also just the final point in my defense of my reading, but also I'm fully by any other sort of reading of the film. I like give equal weight to almost anything I hear, including its Frank Booth stream for all I care. But in my own thing too, what you're saying, Connor, is like, or what Tony said earlier is when she says, I can't like watch this anymore. I don't think it's like a coincidence that the movie starts to sort of really wrap up all of a sudden at that line and begins to sort of unravel the dream logic of itself. And of course ends with a sort of entry into another dream of the Robin and the bug. Of course, tainted, like Tony was saying earlier, with sort of the darkness peppered under or sort of white suburbia wherever we're at. Which is why, like, actually the most fascinating thing, Kurt, and I'm surprised you didn't bring this up, are the two non-white characters in the film are the two black characters in that convenience, like,
hardware store.
Hardware store, yeah.
His dad's hardware store.
Yeah, it's such a random thing. Is it just thrown in there? Do you find it annoying? Is it just
no?
David Lynch more subversion?
I don't want to be the culture police, and I know I'm taking that role right now, and that's okay. I think if it were interesting to me, if it popped off the screen for me, these complaints would be secondary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like some of the things I was talking about how maybe he didn't go far enough for me. And so you're in this middle ground, you're in this purgatorial state where you want that violence to manifest. And maybe that's let's be introspective here, but for an audience, for a viewer, for a consumer, I want to, I don't know. I'm a little all over the map here. I do think that, Tony, you said, well, that's how I approach every Lynch film. That doesn't sit right with me. I don't think you should have to be familiar with a director or writer's kind of canon.
I don't think it requires that. I think you can see like kind of the surrealist imagery as well as the references to dreams that are interspersed throughout the movie, and kind of it's the way that's cadence, or it's like, okay, this feels dreamlike. You know what I mean? And also, I don't need it to be a literal dream. I think movies are dreams. You know, they are. You know, they're not real. They're symbolic representations of ideas, and that means abandoning this literalist interpretation, which I'm not blaming you for. I mean, most people watch movies in that way. Like, that's what's literally happening. This is what this character wants to do. Then he does it. You know, whatever. But I think that like Lynch isn't interested in doing that. And I know you're yes, I understand, like, I'm familiar with his other movies and I've read things about his other movies or whatever, but I don't think it requires that. You know what I mean? I don't think he was handing out a little pamphlet at the screenings and they were reading it and like, oh, that's how I interpret it. I think people respond to the emotions and the colors and the feelings, and then they associate those with things and then put it together later.
Yeah. So like from a visceral standpoint, I just feel like the writing was lazy and the character development was non-existent for anyone outside of Kyle. I really, or Frank, maybe he has a little bit, Laura Dern, you know, to an extent, but it's hard, you know, what are we seeing when we watch the film? Are we seeing the artist? Are we trying to see the film as like a product that is consumed, or as art that is to be critiqued and to be kind of cogitated upon? And I think for me, it hits this place where I feel very uncomfortable, where we perpetually give the artist the benefit of the doubt, and we infer these things that because we know of their other works, we magnify them. And a lot of the movie is not like super surrealist and like totally like, you know, a lot of the movie is kind of rote and it's a little bland at times. And, you know, I don't know how else to I don't know if this is just me being.
Are you talking about like the daytime scenes, or like when is the movie like cinematically rote to you?
You know, just this kind of progression of lackluster mystery that doesn't have much ingenuity to it, and there's the twist that Frank Booth is the guy with the mustache on. I mean, is that supposed to be like ingenious, or the fact that the cop's in on it? It feels kind of like a Harvey Boys novel, but injected with like some testosterone and the novel just like, got fucked in the ass or something like that. I don't know.
I'll say
maybe that's
like,
what he's going for. Maybe that's what he's going for.
Watch this as like a mystery movie. If you're like, oh, I know a great mystery movie, Blue Velvet. It's right up there with Murder on the Orient Express and Knives Out. If you watch, I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but if I were to say that to you and you were to watch it, you'd be right to be disappointed because it's not like a great mystery story by any means, right? If you're on that surface level of like, what's the mystery, what's the reveal, what's the twist, whatever, that stuff isn't all that interesting. I think this is on a much more emotional
level. Like suspenseful,
Yeah.
exciting. Like, does it sustain emotion throughout the whole movie?
I think
like,
so. To me, it does.
Okay.
I find it very like captivating, and like the day and night aspect to it too, or like the night is where the darkness, where the evil, where the alluring takes place, and the idea that he keeps drawn back to this apartment, which is like all the darkness, all of the evil is kept in a physical location, which is a common dream convention. You have a physical place where you put all the evil, and he has to keep going back. He has to keep going back. And I don't even know if he could explain why. And that to me is very powerful, and that feels very true to life. And I think also the performances carry it too. I think the faces, the expressions, I think are mesmerizing. Isabella Rossellini's like reaction when Frank Booth hits her, I think is an astonishing moment of acting. It takes my breath away. And then Kyle MacLachlan's face when he's in the back of that car and he's like really scared. He really sells that like terror and just like, this is further than I wanted to go.
I was hoping he'd get his head chopped off in that whole sequence. Honestly, I was like, please die. Please get shot in the head with a shotgun. Please just blow your brains out off the back of your head. I was waiting for that.
Wow. Isn't getting violently kissed by Dennis Hopper even more horrifying though?
Okay. Why was he not killed by Dennis Hopper? Because it's a dream, right? Like, why did Dennis Hopper, when he punched him in the face, Dennis Hopper is like, I don't know, Noriega on crack, and so he should have fucking killed Kyle MacLachlan in that scene, and I just don't understand why.
My interpretation of that is that he was going to, and then Kyle MacLachlan, for the first time in the movie, stands up for her. He says like, "Hey, stop that," and he punches him in the face. And there's almost a respect like that to me. That's kind of like the reason. That's how I read that sequence. And I also love that too because I love that's the first time in the movie where Dennis Hopper becomes really funny, because Dennis Hopper to me is the id. He's pure chaos. He's pure darkness. He's pure lust. And just like his incredible violence and outrageousness combined with his incredible baby neediness. He calls himself baby and he just wants, he just longs. I mean, it's the most obviously Freudian thing in the world, but just when he's like putting the lipstick on going pretty, just like, it makes me laugh really hard. I don't know. And I think that tonally, that's pretty impressive. That you can take this character who's the source of like this incredible terror and violence and who's like viscerally repulsive and then make him funny in the next thing. I think that's pretty nifty. That's pretty hard to do. And maybe you didn't find that funny. I don't know, but I certainly did.
Well, yeah, even during the closet scene, he's almost funny in a way that, I can't disagree that it's, very unsettling. I wonder if Hopper wasn't the first choice, I think, for the role, but I don't want to get too much into kind of that sort of thing. I had another point. I just
Edward, what's the guy's name?
Scissorhands.
No, from last week.
Edward G. Robinson.
Yes, it was Edward G.
All right, see, baby.
Baby wants to fuck.
Get in the car. We're on a ride. That I would like to see. That would be great.
Yeah, that's a good. But I would just like to support Kirk in observing that I think the last 20 minutes or so of the film is pretty weak. We lose the dreamlike quality because suddenly it does feel almost like a Hardy Boys or kind of the climax of a kind of a lesser kind of a typical 50s crime, TV show almost, except that there's a headshot at the end, right? Even the musical cues are very kind of rote in a way. I mean, there's some of the surreal sequence of when he actually enters the apartment and we see the guy with something lodged in his head and he's standing there kind of comatose. Yeah, those are interesting images, but just I think it's the fact too that Kyle MacLachlan is in control, or Jeffrey is in control in that situation. It kind of loses the kind of dreamlike horror that characterizes the moment he steps into the apartment, right? That kind of whole portion of the film. So I kind of agree. It kind of loses me a little bit. I kind of start to tune out by the end. And certainly just the ending too, with the Robins coming, right? It's sort of it's a strange ending. What is Lynch trying to say? That these issues are truly resolved, that it ends right in pure happiness and bliss. It's an interesting choice, but not one you would kind of expect.
I mean, I think that I can't say that the ending lurked for you viscerally if it didn't. That's an inherently subjective thing.
You froze, Tony.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
But I think you guys are giving the ending a little bit of short shrift in that it's a necessary conclusion to the arc, right? Kyle MacLachlan's arc or Jeffrey's arc, right? And that he's finally taking control in that apartment. He's no longer a witness. He's no longer just watching and just experiencing these forces. He's taking control. He's making peace with that dark part of himself, and he's using it to defeat the greater evil and achieving mastery of himself. That's how I read that scene. And I think that's pretty important thematically, right? I mean, maybe it didn't work for you, but I think the images of the guy suspended there and the earless husband are pretty breathtaking. I think it's a pretty amazing image. And I mean, the trick with the phone, right? The radio thing is a little bit like kind of lame. It's not that exciting to watch, but I don't know. I think that the sequence works for me. I think it's a solid payoff, as far as wrapping the story up.
I think the final point too, and we could move on after. I know we're spending a lot of time. I think the thing too that I'm interested in is the way Kirk was saying how he was almost waiting for more, for it to really push the envelope. I don't know whether you wanted it through violence or you were saying more subversion, or you're waiting for something more subversive, for him to go all the way. And I think what is interesting is the kind of contemporary reaction at the time to whether it's Ebert's or someone else, to how spectacularly exciting, dangerous, creepy, and just kind of breathtaking the way they talk about it. And I think there is, on one hand, if the movie doesn't work for you emotionally the way it works or seems to work for Tony and I, then you almost need that sort of visceral violence or sort of visceral shocking element to maybe carry you through. And I almost feel in the years since I first watched it a little bit more desensitized to some of those first scenes that were kind of surprising at the time. I don't know if it's because of what I watched or if it's what I'm used to now, but that's definitely the case.
Could very well be some desensitization. Yeah. We can wrap up and we can all give concluding remarks, because I don't want to just go off on another tangent.
Yeah. So final section. Hopefully Kirk will pull a Beauty and the Beast on us and surprise us with the vote. Go final tally. Who wants to go first?
Since it's pretty obvious. I actually think, this might be one of my favorite movies of all. No, I'm just kidding. Fuck this movie. Somewhere in between that. I can appreciate the readings that were brought by all three of you. Isabella Rossellini's character, I see a lot of failed potential here. In the end, all she cares about, maybe rightfully so, right? She's a monolithic character, or she's a one-dimensional character in that she cares about the welfare of her son, who's been kidnapped. And at the end, we see that she's reunited with him, or we think he is, or maybe we're all dreaming, whatever. If at some point she had engaged in some act of defiance on some level, and I know that fucking Kyle is in and of itself an act of defiance, but it's also what someone would expect conventionally from someone who's been victimized repeatedly, the idea that they're hypersexualized. And I think that's just a boring trope, to be honest. So I thought there was, it was so well acted, and those moments are so real. And I just wanted her to really step into her own in some way, to, say, fuck you guys. You know what? You're using me to enact your internal intrapsychic struggles with morality. And it's boyish and stupid, and you're a bunch of rubes, but we didn't get that. So maybe I'm longing for what could have been, and maybe I'm too wokeified and also too desensitized. But my final point is this: if this is surreal and it's meant to invoke feelings of a dreamlike state, well, Often hearing someone else retell their dreams is the most boring activity we can engage in. And I kind of feel that way about this. I think there's a gloss that's kind of embossed over this film and over the characters. And it's a gloss that I can't really crack through, and accepting very specific scenes. And I wish it weren't there, because I do wish I could connect with these characters a little bit more. And maybe it's a disconnect within myself that I can't register and parallel the emotions that are being conveyed, though I think I can. I think I'm being somewhat honest with myself. So, I guess at the end of the day, it's probably just personal preference, and this isn't either the genre or the type of film, the evocation that calls to me. So it's a no for me.
Okay. I was hoping you'd do a little turnaround at the end there, but you know what? At the end of the day, I got to respect. No, I do want to rebut one of your last points there, though, because I was reminded of something when you talked about Isabella Rossellini and how you wish she'd stood up to these two men and kind of asserted her independence. It reminds me a bit of Stephen King's, one of his gripes with The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and the character of Wendy, who I think is a great character, by the way, and a great performance. And he said, I think she's one of the most misogynistic creations in history. She just lets this guy walk all over him, yada, yada, yada. When the reality, of course, is if you're an alcoholic, abusive husband, that's what that person would have to do to survive. You'd have to be that meek, quiet person. You know what I mean? That's what she's just surviving in that movie and fighting for her son. And obviously this is a different situation.
So then that's the literalist. That's the literalist interpretation, right? We can't jump back and forth. If we're looking at the symbolic importance of something, for me, I think it would be striking and symbolic to have her exert her independence. Yeah, you're right.
That's like saying he should have had a different dream. You know what I mean? That doesn't make any sense. The symbolic, if it's Kyle's dream, if it's what's Laura Dern's or Laura Dern's dream, there's no reason for her to do that. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's taking something in from outside of the movie.
I think we need to go deeper. Let's go to limbo. Let's go visit our.
I'm just saying, I don't think that the criticism really holds water.
That's your opinion. I disagree, but
I like Tony's context there and kind of argument, but he lost me once he brought in The Shining, which is a movie we'll bring in one day, and I'll be fully on Stephen King's side there.
Okay, well, I heartily disagree. It's a great performance, great acting, great character. Anyway, I'm a yes. I do think that a movie that is willing to risk these criticisms, that is willing to show the ugliest and most perverted parts of a person's self, is something to be commended.
Deciding factor, Connor.
This comes down to me, Obviously, I absolutely loved and was gripped by this movie the first time I watched it. This time around, I was definitely more lukewarm than I was before. I've been hearing a lot of Kirk's arguments, and they make a lot of sense. When you kind of stand outside it, even for a moment, outside of my own experience too, I have to admit, right? The reason I loved it was because it spoke to me at that time, right? And I needed some distance, and maybe now I kind of see it more for what it truly is. So, yeah, I'm very tempted right now to strike a blow, sort of Oedipus style.
All appropriate.
Sort of classic archetype, the American artiste, auteur, right? Renaissance man. I'd love to strike him off the pedestal and, work through all of my weird adolescent emotions that way. But I have to say that still, as Tony kind of observed, everything that Tony says is pretty much correct, right? The design is there, the blueprint, it all works. All of the elements that I enjoyed the first time are all there. Maybe it's just that I can't enjoy it as much now on a different watching. But I have to admit, right, that it's all there. And I'm not sure, right, that we can completely stand outside it. We have to meet the movie on its terms, I think. And so in that respect, I'm going to worship at the phallus of David Lynch. I'm going to give it a yes.
All right. Very eloquently put.
But
Connor.
It's sort of like it's a half yes. It's
So
kind of like it's not an emphatic yes.
I thought you were going to pull it back one more time.
And by yes, I mean no.
All right. Final part. Now that we got the very difficult, hard nerve-wracking thing out of the way, Kirk. Very eloquently put, though, Kirk. Very well put. You made me question some of my own morals.
Strapped him to the chair.
I came ready today, I'll tell you that much. But
I
it
wanted
was
to
fun
pull
work.
I wanted to pull the ultimate card and be like, Shay loved it.
Well, Shay loved it. She's a woman. What are
And
you,
your
Kirk?
sense is for not.
You're completely wrong,
Yeah,
Kirk.
yeah.
You
She thinks
typical
it's
man.
empowering. No, I love how you guys allow me to enact these dormant family dynamics that I obviously struggle with. So I appreciate it. On a weekly basis, too. This is cheaper than therapy.
By the way, you still owe me. I billed you on Venmo, Kirk, and we'll see.
Yeah. Oh, recommendations. I'm almost forgetting. All right. Final segment. Who wants to go first, Kirk?
Well, since
I feel like we
I've
should
done
let you
these
decide.
recently,
Yeah.
it is my God-given right to decide, Anthony, right now, as I am the least recent. And so I will have, let's do Tony, then Connor, then I'll go last. Go ahead.
All right, guys. I think it's time we do The Shining. Why not? Let's just do The Shining. That's all.
I'm a little bit torn right now.
Blue Velvet again.
Between something old and something new. But I'm going to do something new. It's a little bit out of character. I got plenty of old movies to share. But I'm going to recommend a movie, which I do not remember when it was from exactly. But the movie is called Green Room. And it's a very recent film that I think struck me. It's something I'd like to kind of revisit, sort of made the rounds. It was a point of talking, sort of point of discussion in a lot of movie circles a couple of years ago. And yeah, it's just a very unique movie. I think there's nothing quite like it. It really stands out to me as one of the movies I've seen in the past years, right? That really has something kind of new or is doing something new with film. Yeah, I would just offer that up as a possible direction.
All right, fair enough. Let's see here. I feel like Tony's trapping me. I feel like this is some sort of scheme I'm not aware of. Let me go with a while back we did a film that I thoroughly disliked. You might remember it, and you've probably seen it on every top 10 list of the century. Do you know what movie I might be talking about? Yeah, see, they don't even, it's too many to count. But The Social Network.
Social Network,
and
okay.
We're not going to be watching that, but that movie was directed by, wasn't it directed by Fincher?
Yes.
Directed by Fincher.
Okay. Another movie Fincher did, I want to redeem his name from that work of pure cine trash, and I want us to watch Zodiac, 2007, I think. A Fincher classic, does a great job. It's follows the prolific Zodiac killer through the eyes of a citizen detective played by Jake Gyllenhaal. Anyways, I think this is how you do kind of a serial investigation. I don't even know how to describe it. It's very methodical, very detail oriented. There's a lot of myth, and then there's facts, and the juxtaposition is really great for both the audience and for the film just in a standalone aspect. I think the contrast really speaks for itself. But yeah, and also Anthony's from California. This took place in the Bay Area, so not totally close, but I think with the Golden State Killer now actually facing sentencing, what better time than to dive into a little bit of true crime. So we'll hear some rebuttals, but
yeah, so there's two that are catching my eye. There's a third I kind of want to pick just to screw those other two, but I need to hear more. Who wants to go first?
Rebuttals.
First of all, we can discuss the character of Wendy at length, which I think would be very important for all of us to do. I'm sure there'll be a lot of great points made by all of us. And the only true crime, Kirk, I'll be letting you go after this abysmal performance this episode.
Oh my gosh.
We picked three film Twitter approved, like very cool movies. They're all very respected, very cool. There's no big backlash against any of them, which leaves us a great lane to be contrarians. So there's a great opportunity there, you know.
Sure.
So I think that's good. I think The Shining is just like, you know, it's a movie I think that we were just going to do sooner or later. You know, it's a movie everyone's seen, everyone likes. I think it's really fun. I think there's a lot of great, amazing details and things to kind of pick apart and angles, you know, through which to view it. We can talk about adaptations. We can talk about reading the movie and like the Room 237 sense. We can talk about a million things. It's just a timeless film. And these other two movies are both great. I wonder if Green Room, there's quite as much meat on the bone. That's my kind of skepticism. I do remember liking it quite a bit. I don't know if there's quite as much to discuss. And Zodiac, I'm due to rewatch, but I certainly enjoy it. Although The Shining is my favorite of the three. So that's my pitch.
Yeah. You know, I can kind of see where Tony's coming from saying Green Room doesn't have a lot of meat on the bone. I think it's hard because, you know, its effect it's so unlike The Shining. I mean, I would oppose those two. Because, you know, The Shining, it's, you know, like I said, it's been so much analyzed. It's kind of all of the hidden clues in it. And that's kind of why, you know, I don't know, I'm not sure I would have as much fun talking about it. It's like we're kind of going through pre-existing talking points and kind of things, and we're approaching this like it's this kind of puzzle to be solved. You know, I don't know. I'm just not sure I feel like I really want to revisit that in that vein. Although, I do admit it's a great movie, but Green Room, I think, could be interesting. I think the conversation would have to go to interesting places. It's something that people don't, you know, necessarily. I'm sure people have dissected it, but I'm curious how we would dissect it if we had to sort of talk about it and its strengths. And Zodiac, it's one of those movies that, as many times as it was on late night cable, I never watched it, even 10 minutes of it, as I usually do with lots of movies that appear on cable. You know, I have to admit, I would be very interested in seeing it.
I think that you could say the same thing about Blue Velvet you said about The Shining, though. It has been kind of picked apart over the years, and we still were able to find.
Yeah. And I think the worse for it, you know.
Yeah.
So, yes, The Shining, excellent movie. Really, obviously, the classic of like that would be in the pantheon, right? That would be up the mountain, up Mount Sinai. But I do think I would almost be more interested in watching Room 237 so we could like talk about the people that are talking about it. But I don't know. It's I'd still watch it, obviously, and be happy doing so. Green Room, I love. It's ultra violent. I love Patrick Stewart's performance. And I think there are some other great performances there, and how we what we're allowed to show and how we're allowed to convey violence, and the true, like, it goes beyond like movie violence, which I think more films need to do. And so, yeah, we come to my film, Zodiac. It's a saga. It's really like an epic, and it could have been like a TV miniseries, but there's so much that the public thinks they know or knows about this person. He's such an enigma. And he's so representative of all of our fears, our collective fears of home invasion or just vulnerability, you know, killing couples on nice outings to Lake Napa or wherever they were. So Lake Sonoma, I think. But yeah, I think it's a really great movie that kind of showcases and funnels that group hysteria that we can get into, that, you know, we witness time and time again with stuff like the DC Sniper, things like Oklahoma City, and, you know, not these are all horrible events. I'm not to say that we're being hysterical over them, but how we respond to them is worth examining. And I think Fincher does it well. And my final point, my piece de résistance, is that I don't always ardently defend the movies I choose. Sometimes, Anthony, if you dislike this movie, I am very suggestible and naive as a person. So if you convince me, I'll shit on it too. So I'm your guy, man. So that at least makes for good content, because I'll look like a fool.
He started out as Dennis Hopper, now he's Isabella Rossellini.
Yeah, it's a very interesting tactic there, Kirk.
Yeah, that's weird, like, negging. And I think one thing to note about Kirk's movie, of the three, it's the only one where no one says the N-word. So That's something to consider.
Great point. Great point. No, I think
Obviously, you haven't seen the director's cut, but go ahead.
I think going on, I would have been most inclined towards Tony's because it's one I wanted to rewatch for years, and it's one I actually wanted to pitch myself. But I think, as Connor was saying, we've heard a lot about it, and I know Connor doesn't want to hear me talk more about Mark Fisher at all. So
No, I would love to.
well, we'll go on like I said. I'm inclined towards The Green Room, if only because I remember not seeing it when you two had. And I remember missing out on the conversation there years back.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk's movie could have more easily sold me by just reminding me that it's a Robert Downey Jr. movie where he's not playing Iron Man. So
I forgot to mention that. And he's not Dr. Doolittle either. So
yeah, so it's sort of a toss-up. I really want to go back and forth, but I'm going to go with Kirk. I feel like I got to give Kirk a little hand after today's episode.
hey, there we go. Throw a dog a bone.
So the sort of weird nagging of you'd be willing to trash on it definitely sold me.
My final form. You don't even understand.
Well, Kirk.
There we go, folks.
All right.
So
No, I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah.
next week,
Timely,
Bob
as
Barker
Kirk argued.
returns. The Price is Right.
I'll
You want to
have
sign the way there,